Well, good morning. Welcome to another little video. Not sure where the camera is on this. Over there. Oh, it's over there. It's 4 a.m. and another night of being woken up by the Spirit. And I find that during the process of transformation, especially when I was using the workbook of A Course in Miracles some years ago, I would often be up at like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or something like that. And I would find that unless I did my lesson or read some of the text, or in many cases I would wander over to the office and start typing out whatever was coming through, which would often be pages. I would sit at the computer with two fingers for quite some time. And then I couldn't get back to sleep. And during the process of transformation where you're unlearning and relearning, the mind goes through such radical shifts if you're devoted and if you put your whole heart and soul into it. And those shifts, of course, transfer to the body, and you get all these sorts of weird, almost like a physical anxiety, not an emotional one that people have, the existential anxiety, but a physical sort of like tensioning and like awkwardness, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable in your skin at some points. But it's different for everybody. Some people don't seem to find too much of that, but I think it depends upon your willingness and your readiness, perhaps, for those shifts to occur. I remember one night at the Healing Centre, Jan has now left the building onward with her journey. Both of us were going through something at the same time, energetically, which does happen when you're living and cloistered with a group of fellows who are participating in this energetically. You tend to gravitate towards very similar timelines and very similar here and now lines. But we had one bathtub at the Healing Centre. All the cabins that were there, it was a residential sort of arrangement. All the people in the cabins and everybody had a shower. But we had one bathtub which was in a little washroom, a little external bathroom for the whole centre. And it was very nice to be able to have a hot bath from time to time. But on this particular night, there was such a sense of crawling under the skin and horrible. It was awful. And my mental sense of things was that I had to have a really hot bath. And I went to the bathhouse at probably about this time, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, being unable to sleep. And of course, Jan was already in there going through exactly the same thing. And she wouldn't speed it up for me. I had to wait, and it was the most awful. It was horrific. It was a really, really bad experience. And there have been a few of those, but when you include them in as being all good, as being part of the nature of healing, then the burden of feeling distressed about it seems to be relieved. You still don't enjoy it, but mentally you're okay with it. So anyway, that's not what I wanted to talk about in this video. I just was woken up before and instructed to make a video about singularity, which to do that, of course, but it wouldn't be helpful. I often have spiritual students say to me, what's all this we and us and them and others and terminology that you use? And it's like, well, firstly, I'm not attempting to reach enlightenment. And secondly, if I didn't use that terminology, I may as well not bother teaching anything. Because to teach really is to teach by example, and my own sense of inner peace and happiness and contentment and all of that with my sense of self is the greatest lesson that I can offer, the greatest teaching or the greatest representation that I can offer of what it is personally as this avatar, not as Christ mind, but as this avatar I have been through in the dreaming in the world. And I like to talk about it at the avatar level because that's where I find myself. That's where the mind seems to be gravitating to and drawn to as part and parcel of the playing out of the particulars of salvation. Being unrequired in any other level of the life experience in the journey of the soul. So, keeping it singular. There are two premises on which all spiritual discipline rests. Doesn't matter if you're a religious person or if you're a spiritual person or if you're not a person at all, if you don't see yourself as a body, which I don't, or even in a body. If you're a student of A Course in Miracles, you'll be familiar with that precept that you no longer see yourself as a body or in a body. Having had an experience of the illumination of my mind, I know verbatim and for fact that I am not here, which sounds perhaps insane, and it's very tricky to explain. It's like The Matrix. If you've seen the movie The Matrix, I'm somewhere else in the red jelly dreaming that I'm here in this virtual experience. Of course, but eternity is not the red jelly. It's home. It's beautiful. It's beyond description, beyond words. But anyway, that as a concept and an idea, just forget about that I told you that. You have to experience it for yourself, and you will, because you did. And the only concern I have for doing anything in this realm now is the collapse of time, to bring that time between what seems to be now and what has already happened closer together. And you might say, well, how do you collapse time? And I've done plenty of videos on that, I'm sure. Learning to master time being an idea in my own mind, pardon me, hiccups. The idea of keeping it singular is really very simple. I'm not separate from anything I see, anything. And I often have people say to me, oh, I used to be like that. I know that lesson that person's going through because I've been through that. And as if there's somehow a progression in learning or a linear sequential acquisition of learning, and there isn't. Unlearning is the first part of spiritual transformation, where you unlearn the ways of the world that you have learnt since you were a little bub, a little toddler, from Sesame Street or whatever it is that you've taken your early learning from and built upon up until middle age, where you feel confident with your place in the world in some sort of sense that you can meet it on equal terms. And then you realise it's all rubbish, and you begin your unlearning through the retraining of your mind through using the workbook lessons of A Course in Miracles. And you begin to gravitate more and more to this singular sense of self, where I keep my finger on my nose on earth as an earthly being. Let's say I'll own that for a minute. I'll be totally earthbound, totally human, totally fallible, totally everything for a minute. Own that as a singular sense of self in the idea of looking out at what I see. It's not like I learned a lesson before and now I'm learning a new lesson. There's only the here and the now. There's not like any kind of graduation to this. We talk about it as graduating, of course, once you have an experience that's non-temporal, It's like, well done. You earned it. And Jesus talks about it as earning it. You earned your release. And I often have Eastern associations will say to me, that's not right that you've earned it because it's your inheritance. You're entitled to it. And it's like, yes, but you have to earn that entitlement. There's a sense of becoming revelation ready and all of that. But I'm getting off the track a little bit there. But the singular sense of self includes all things, as above in eternity, where you have the experience of singular self, whole self, unified self, creative self, all of that. And so on earth. But on earth it appears through the illusion of things that my sense of self is fragmented. And of course that's the work that we, and I say we, embark upon when we begin our spiritual transformation, when we begin the healing of our mind and undergo what we call healing through an action of forgiveness, that essentially I'm forgiving myself for all my beliefs in separation, but all my beliefs in thinking that I'm separate from anyone or anything. What I see is me. That doesn't change. It's not that I see something that's me and then I have an experience and now I see other people that are having their experiences. It's like, no, that doesn't work. I can't be singular one moment and then be dualistic the next. So my declaration in this video in that sense then is that I'm not separate from anyone or anything, and this video is simply a marker somewhere in time reminding myself of my purpose, my new purpose, and it becomes very helpful for that. So finger on the nose, what I see is me. If I see somebody out there, some situation, something I like or don't like, if it triggers me or if I notice it, even if it's causes me a tiny little sigh or any sort of disturbance to my own peace of mind, it's me. And when I say it's me, it's not me as in the whole me, it's me as in the symbolic representation of a belief of myself, wherein I think that I'm separate from the whole, separate from God. And that includes the body, includes the avatar. Whether you want to accept that or not, for me, doesn't really matter. Nothing can be left outside of what is whole. That's why I like to give people A Course in Miracles. I like to give people the book. So here you go and argue with this. It's a perfect singular teaching coming from a mind that's already resurrected from the realm and ascended, resurrected and ascended. Keeping it singular, I mean, you could just start and stop with the very first lesson of A Course in Miracles. Nothing I see means anything. Nothing I see means anything. And put lesson 10 to that, my thoughts don't mean anything. Frog in my throat. There's always frogs in your throat at 4 a.m. That thought does not mean anything. So keeping it singular, it's not difficult, but it is very different, because the mind has been habitually trained, repetitively trained in every moment, in every circumstance, to separate out the I and the them. And now I'm learning to see that what I think I see in the them is a reflection of the I. It's just me. I'm looking at my own thoughts that I've been projecting out onto the world, out onto people, situations and events that get picked up in the energetic frequency and reflected back to me, because mind is whole. Life is mind and mind is whole. I take my own thoughts, my own mind with me wherever I go, and it doesn't matter if I run from one situation or try to escape from one situation and change the landscape. It's just nothing more than changing the deck chairs on the Titanic. I can't escape my own thinking. And there's no good in being transcendent or trying to transcend my thinking through meditation. Transcendental meditation, that's pointless, because as soon as I finish my meditation, there's my thinking again. I have to transform, not transcend, transform my thinking. And that's what is put before you when you open A Course in Miracles. I have to reinterpret through forgiveness, through an action of forgiveness, my whole systematic way of thinking through the use of symbols is reinterpreted. You might think, well, that's an incredibly big job. How would you do that? I don't do it. I simply follow the instructions and allow the miracle to occur. And that miracle is like what's that game, the pick-up sticks one? You pull the stick out and eventually they all fall. It's much like that. You start putting a few reasonable concepts into your thought system and they start to grade up against every other kind of concept that you have in a linear temporal sense, and you start to see that all of a sudden your thought system that is based on the nature of physical comprehension begins to come apart at the seams. That can be quite traumatic. Most people who undergo a true spiritual transformation will tell you that it's traumatic. And traumatic's probably an understatement sometimes. There are some real, oh God. Not nice at all. I watched a funny little video of somebody had put together a meme video, I suppose you would call it, where the caption was, what people think spiritual work is like, and there was a ballerina or somebody dancing, having a lovely time, the sun's shining and everything, and they're kind of like astrally ignorant of the world around them. And then there was the next caption, what it's really like, and there was some guy kind of overweight tumbling down a hill that never ended. He just kept going boom, boom, and he was getting all beaten up and eventually got to the bottom. I thought, man, that is so accurate. It's a roller coaster. It's a roller coaster. But if it's not a roller coaster, you're not on the ride. You have to take the ride. I think it was Bill Hicks who coined it as a ride. It's just a ride, man. So keeping it singular, I'm not separate. It's as simple as that. The one problem, one solution, I don't know if you'd call it an ideology, but the one problem, one solution perspective that the Course in Miracles holds out for consideration is that my sole problem in all things is thinking that I'm separate from God. Because when I'm separate from God, I'm actually out of the flow. And I have to learn to let go and let God. Let go of my out of the flowness and get back in the flow through that action of letting go. So my one problem is the belief that I'm separate from God, and the whole answer to that problem, the solution to it, is that I'm not. Embrace the solution and the problem just disappears. Let go of fear and love is automatically there. You only have two emotions, love and fear. Let go of one and the other one was there all along. Notwithstanding my unreasonable impressions of the fearful perspective of things based on my own judgments and meaning that I projected out onto the form, thinking that I was this body and vulnerable and doomed to die. Never was so and is not so now. So in keeping it singular, I keep my finger on my nose. I'm not separate from what I see. And if you take a little dot of super glue, stick it on your thing and boop, that will do you incredibly well. Over the last, if I use time, 26 years, I suppose, 27 years, I've had many students, and I should, inverted commas, teachers. Many students and teachers, which is the one and the same thing, because as you teach, you learn, and you learn by teaching. But I've had many students who have made great advance and great benefit by the very simple practice of keeping your finger there. I'm not separate from what I see, ever. There's no such thing as progress in awakening. There's only awake or not awake. Awake or asleep, and asleep is an impossibility. It's just simply I'm remembering or I'm forgetting. I'm remembering or I'm abiding in the forgetfulness of remembering not. Just put my feet up here. So, finger there. And then it becomes singular. Then it becomes I. Then it becomes me. And you go beyond, or I should say I'll try and keep it singular. And it's very awkward, but the temptation to believe there's someone out there or whatever, but nonetheless, coming from the experience of self that I have had, my declaration is that the process of holding one's finger on one's nose, and I'd like to come up with some sort of coined phrase for this. Finger nosing. No, that sounds like you're picking your nose. Something. It does take you internal. So it's like if I'm not separate from what I see out in the world, if it's all just me, then the process of undergoing those moments of healing through realizing, hang on a minute, my peace of mind's been disturbed by something out there, and then realizing not out there, but actually in here by my own thoughts about what I think is out there, which is nothing, all being illusory. It eventually takes you internally. It takes me internal. So when I'm sitting in my meditation, I'm not separate from anything. I realize that my thoughts in here are reflected symbolically out in the world in a way that I can understand and recognize as being perhaps the triggers of my erroneous or non-creative state, which is the state of denial, which is what the belief in being separate from God manifests as, shows up as denial. No, that's not me, that's somebody else, that's denial. It's like, no, hang on, that's not somebody else. Never was and never will be. That's me, that's myself. And Course in Miracle uses the term, that's my brother. But of course, once you have an experience, you realize the Father and the Son are one. There are not individual brothers walking around in the world. And when I saw the world disappear in front of my eyes in the twinkling of an eye, it was almost a 3-stage disappearing. There was the people standing in front of me vanished all at once like that. The wall that was behind them then vanished, and I could see out into the world, the houses and trees and everything outside, which was, I didn't even have time to say, what the? And then that all vanished and my body vanished. It was like a twinkle, a star goes, tiddle-doo, tiddle-doo. Twinkle, twinkle. And I realized that everything and everyone is nothing more than an idea about itself in my own thinking. And that, when it goes internal, my or I becomes then spiritual, becomes the mind. Because our Course in Miracles does operate where it is needed, it operates within the conscious level, but receives its direction and its prompt from the higher conscious or the miracle level or the spiritual level of mind, which in a 24/7 kind of sense we remain unaware of until we begin to live our lives in faith, until we begin to practice acts of faith in all of our doings and in all of our affairs. Learning to become miracle-minded so that we can become revelation-ready. There we go, I'm saying we again. The paradoxical nature, or the contradictory nature, contradictory might be better than paradoxical in this regard, but the contradictory nature of maintaining singular self falls away, or becomes, actually it doesn't fall away, it becomes more obvious when you're awake. And for a second I'll call it awake amongst the sleeping. When you're awake and you realize the nature of the sleeping world, you realize the nature of the dreaming world, and you attempt to represent the experience you've had here through whatever means is given you to do that. And of course, the images and the figures in the dream that seem to be the avatars of your brothers tend to want to look at you as if you're just like them. Oh, aren't you just like us? Aren't you a student of A Course in Miracles, just like us? Well, perhaps I was for a moment, but having now realized the truth through the use of that book, and for me it was slightly different, top down rather than bottom up. But having realized the truth, I now become, and you now become, and I have to go dualistic there, there's no other way about it, but self-aware persons, self-aware I, becomes through the avatar and myriad avatars, the appearance of myriad avatars. Very difficult to talk about this stuff sometimes. Part and parcel of the call to awaken itself. So yes, on a physical frame, on a physical level, I appear to be just like everyone and everything else, but my signature, my vibratory signature, has drastically shifted in a 180-degree turn, which is repentance, which is what repent means, to turn around. And I've entered into a ministry, perhaps, of calling, of being part and parcel of a representative of that call. And so to the mind that's going through, and I should say, my teacher Ted used to talk about it as your late timers early in time. So it's like you've had an out-of-time experience, which can only happen at the end of time or at the very beginning of time, beyond the alpha and the omega, and you've come back into time somewhere, which is exactly how I relate to it. Come back into time somewhere to represent that experience. The idea then of, and I know this is contradicting what I said in the beginning of this video, that there's never anyone, even after that experience, never anyone. And I should have clarified that a little bit better, because even after having had the experience of true self, there is still always healing to do, but healing to do without any kind of false narrative. It's like it's impossible for me now to be able to take my finger off my nose and pretend that didn't happen. I don't have doubt about who I am or what I am. I may still have moments of healing that are required as I undergo the process of forgiving the particulars of my dream, etc., etc. But for a moment in time, the avatar and the mind association using the avatar had an experience that showed the truth, which now has set the waypoint for all activity and for the action of keeping things singular and collapsing time, thus shortening the time of suffering for everybody. Keeping it singular. I, me. In this year 2023, if you're watching this in the far distant future, society or global society, especially in the West, is having this rather curious fascination with pronouns and attempting to validate the physical self, the physical identity through bodily association as male, female, or other. It's not male and it's not female and it's not other. There is no such thing as the body. It doesn't exist at all in any given instant. It's an idea representing an original sin or an original error or an original. Actually, it's not exactly true. That occurred in mind, but representing an opportunity or a catalyst opportunity for change in addressing the idea of separation. It cannot not occur that the immature or the ignorant mind ascribes identity values to it, but that changes as you go along. It's just, and I was talking with my friend Joe, brother Joe, she's been working with the Course in Miracles for, I suppose, the best part of this year or a major part of this year, quite new to it. We were talking last night about the laying aside of the body, the vessel, in a very joyous manner. She works in palliative care and she has these moments with her friends there in palliative care, and she sits with them as they transition from the stage of physical association to non-physical association. And of course, we were very happy to realise that we're not fearful of that. There's no, there's probably still going to be that moment of, oh, ooh, or maybe not. When the world disappeared, it just so quicker than a breath, quicker than a blink, really, a twinkling. Keeping it singular. When you have that experience of self, divine self, illumination, enlightenment, salvation, whatever you want to call it, and you have it in your agreement, I don't know how else to talk about this part of it, but when you have it in your agreement with Jesus or agreement with the council of atonement to finish your journey here, to complete the process of healing here, you then have two perspectives on life, the old one and the new one, wherein you know the truth. And the process of healing then becomes more acute. The process of healing becomes inescapable because the experience that you have had is an abiding experience. The reactive nature to that experience that the cellular reassociation goes through as a, what would you call it, as a forerunner to mastering inner peace, perhaps, as a forerunner to becoming accepting of the process. Well, for me, it lasted about 6 months. I couldn't stop laughing. But that's sort of worn off now, and now the abiding, and I'm talking about maniacal laughing, like ridiculous, just spontaneous laughing and crying a little sometimes. I used to cry acidic tears. If I cried, my tears would burn, and it's another byproduct of, met somebody else that once told me their tears burned as well. Very uncomfortable. Laughing is a much better mechanism of release. Oh, I lost track of what I was going to say then. Keep it here. Keep your finger there. I'm not separate from what I see. I choose the feelings I experience, and etc., etc. I've given it all the meaning it has for me. All right, well, 35 minutes. I don't think anybody's going to listen that long. Unless you're awake at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning like me. Got nothing else to do. Nothing else you'd rather do. Working out your own salvation it's a bit of a bitch, like it really is. All right, peace.